Hello everyone, Kristina Werner here. Welcome to this Mama Elephant class for Crap and Create, September 2022. This is the card event. So excited to get going on this. Hopefully, most of you or all of you have done the homework. If not, we're going to be going through this a little bit quickly, so hopefully you'll be able to move along with us. But you're going to have a lot of fun today. We're going to do some really simple watercoloring. This is a great introduction to watercolor. You're going to try a few different watercoloring techniques, and we're going to be using inks for that instead of watercolor paints. Now, if you have watercolor paints and you are familiar with them, or if you just want to try them out, feel free to use those paints. You can do everything with those paints that we're going to be doing today with the inks. But just so you know, there are a couple spots you will need ink. Actually, I think just one spot. When we create this background for behind this scene, you will need a couple of ink pads. You'll need a blue and a pink. I'll be using the blue and pink that I've used for most of the painting. So just something to be aware of. Okay, so here are the finished cards for today. I've got my little bag of everything I need for all of my cards, and got the dies and the stamp set here too. The instructions that are in your book are great if you're heading straight into this class and you're going to be making each card individually, but because we're going to try to make all three cards all at once, we're going to do something a little bit different from what's in the instructions. We're going to be doing all of our watercolor painting at the very beginning here so that it has ample time to dry before we have to start assembling. So let's get into all of the painting. I'm going to put these aside for a moment. We'll come back to those in a little bit. And I'm going to take out all of my prepped pieces. All right, we're going to start with this one right here that has all of the little individual things painted. We're going to start with that one. Now, you're going to need a slick surface for all of your painting today. So I'm going to zoom in here for you. I'm going to do everything in real time, so you're going to have plenty of time to follow along. And I'm also going to put up on the side of the screen here, I'm just going to put my palette here that I'll be working off of so that you guys can see everything I'm doing. I have this slick surface here that I'll just be smushing my ink pads down to. Now I'm going to tape this ink pad or this palette down to my surface here so it doesn't slide around as I'm using it. You don't need to do that. This is just me making sure I film everything well for you guys. All right, so we're going to start out by getting our little water brush that we're using. And here's a tip for you. You can use these water brushes as they're intended by putting water inside the brush into the barrel. I'm not going to be doing that today. I find that I have a little bit more control if I just use it as a regular brush and pick up water out of a cup. So if you don't already have a cup of water, run on over and grab a cup of water at your water source. I'm coming over to my sink, grabbing a little water. Like I said, we're doing this completely in real time. So if I don't have anything that's right at my fingertips, you're going to have to wait for me to grab it, basically. All right. You'll also need a little paper towel. And this is mostly just to wipe our brush off if we have a little too much water on it. That's how I like to paint. All right, so we can just dip our brush in here for water when we need it. We're going to start with a nice brown color. I'm using Walnut Stain. It's a distress ink. And I'm going to smush that down onto my palette so I have a pretty good little puddle of ink there. And we're going to just start painting all of the brown areas. So we're going to paint the nightstands and also the bed. All right, so I'm adding just a couple drops of, like, dipping my brush a couple times. And I'm going to come in here and start painting. So when you're painting this first initial layer, you want just basically flat color. So we're not going to worry about, you know, doing any shading or anything like that. We just want brown covering the entire, sorry, a little blurry there. We just want brown covering the entire area of the nightstand. And we're going to come back in with a second layer and add the shading. So I'm going to grab a little more ink or paint on my brush. Then I can start painting again. This is a really less intimidating way to do watercolor, especially when you're coloring small images like this. So like I said, we're just doing a plain flat wash of color over all of these spots. And I'm going to slide this up and I'm going to work on the bed frame now. I'm going to add more paint on my brush and I'm going to start painting the bed. So we've got the two posts, including the feet that are in front and the back post, I guess, too. I'm going to go all the way across and pull more of that color and grab some more paint on my paintbrush and pull this over just like this. And because we're moving fairly quickly, we shouldn't have any big streaks of color. But if you do, it's not a huge deal. We're just having fun. We're painting images for cards today. So keep continuing painting. We want the entire footboard of the bed. And then we're going to come up here on the top of the bed behind the pillows and we're going to paint the head or the headboard. Yeah, that's what it's called, the headboard. We'll just add that brown in right there. Okay, so while those images are drying, we're going to clean off our brush real quick. Just dip that in water, wipe it on the paper towel. And we're going to move on to something else while these areas dry. That's one thing that you need to remember when you're doing watercoloring is that if you want to do adjacent areas, like for instance, the spine of this book with the background of the nightstand, you would want to wait till the nightstand area is completely dry because wherever the paper is wet, it invites color. So if I was to paint the spine of the book right now, there's a pretty good likelihood that the colors would start mixing and then it would bleed into the other areas. So we don't want that. We're going to move on to something else. We're going to move on to our little bunny down here. I'm going to use a yellow color. I'm using scattered straw. And I'll just smush that down onto my little surface here. And I'll get my brush wet. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with the brown. We're just going to do a wash of color over the entire bunny. Just kidding. Before we do that, I'm also going to get a pink shade. I'm using worn lipstick. Just going to squish that down. We're going to need to pick up a little bit of that worn lipstick while the bunny's still wet. So we want that prepped. So go ahead and get a little bit of pink on your palette ready to go. And then we'll go in and start painting the bunny. All right, so I've got a nice wash of the nice puddle of color of that scattered straw. And I'm going to come in and start painting the bunny. Mine's a little anemic. I'm adding a little more of that ink in there. There we go. And I'm just painting the bunny. I'm going to skip over his little nose. And I'm starting from the ears and just moving down. And we're going over the entire surface of his body and arms and legs. And while that's still wet, I'm going to clean off my brush, dab it on a paper towel, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of this worn lipstick shade. And I'm just going to add just a few little drops of pink right on his cheeks. And because the paper is still wet with the yellow paint, it's going to wick away at that pink and it's going to get a really nice soft blush. We're not going to paint his nose right now because remember, we need to wait for the yellow to dry first. All right, we're going to leave this alone and let it dry completely. We're going to move on to another section of our painting. Let's go ahead and paint the lamp and the vase. For the lamp, I'm using seedless preserves. And for the other lamp, or I'm sorry, the pot, the flower with the pot, I'm using broken china. And I'm going to clean off my brush, just dip that in water. And then I'm going to come into this seedless preserves. About 2 dips into my water is just about perfect. I'm going to come over to my lamp and I'm going to start painting. Just going to put a nice wash of color over that entire lamp. And then I'm going to clean off my brush. I'm going to do the same thing with the broken china. This time I'll be painting the vase. Just add that blue right on there. Okay. For the box of tissues, we're going to be using peeled paint. It's a nice green shade. So I'll just clean my brush off and then grab some of that peeled paint. And then do a nice wash of color over the entire box. Okay. I'm going to use that same peeled paint shade for the bottom of the plant and also the stem of the plant. I think this is an orchid actually. Just going to paint that in to a nice green shade. Okay. Now I think our brown is pretty dry. I'm just using my fingertips to kind of, well, actually, we have a little more painting we can do. We're going to take tumbled glass, nice pale blue, and we're going to paint the top of the lamp. All right, so this lamp here, the way I'm going to be painting it is I'm going to do a stripe right across the bottom, and then I'm just doing a little bit of a vertical line right along each of the black. Do you see that? It's a little bit faint to see. In fact, I might even bring a little bit of that broken china just to get it to be a little bit darker. There we go. There you can see it a little bit more now. All right, I'm going to grab a little bit of that same blue shade, the really pale blue, and we're going to add some shading onto the bed. We're going to add a little bit of the blue along the sides of the pillows and right along the bottom edge on each pillow. Most of this shading will actually be hidden by our bunny once he's in the bed, but no, we're going to paint the whole thing just in case. I'm also going to take this blue shade and I'm just going to go right across the bottom here, just in a little striped line, just a little line right there. Okay, so now we've mostly got all of our initial painting done. We do have a little bit more to do as far as under layers go, but while we wait for some things to dry, we're going to go back to the very first thing we colored at the start. So we're going to go back to the nightstands. I'm going to go right back into that same color we used before. So walnut stain in my case, and I'm going to start adding some of the shadows. All right, so I'm going to come up here. I'm going to do a little bit, very thin little line right at the bottom of the top of each nightstand. Just like that. I'm also going to grab a little bit of a brown on my brush, and I'll color in those handles on the drawers. And then I'm going to do a line of shading right underneath the lip of that nightstand. Put a little bit of shadow because the lip of the nightstand, it hangs out from the edge. I'm going to add more paint on my brush. And now I'm going to emphasize the sides and the bottom of each drawer. Just like that. We're also going to do a little horizontal line right at the bottom of this section. We're just adding a little bit of shading on this nightstand. Okay, so the back wall of the nightstand will be dark because it's in shadow. So I'm going to grab more of my paint or ink without adding water to my brush. And then I'm just going to come and paint a darker wash right over that back wall area. And even just having 2 layers of the color, even if it's not any darker than the first layer, but having 2 layers of color will darken up this area. All right, so we've got the back wall all done. I'm going to grab more of that brown shade, and we're going to go down the outside edge of these 2 vertical areas. Let's go down both of the outsides. And then the very last bit on this is the bottom of the bottom shelf. Add a little bit of that color right along the bottom. Okay, so that's our first shaded area. Next, we're going to go down and work on the bed. We come down here. Grab some more of that darker shade. I'm not adding any water to my brush. And we're going to do a similar shading on this down here as well. We're going to start with the sides. And I'm also going to get the very bottom of the bed. You can have it curved just a little bit at the top there. And I'm going to do the other side as well. Just a little line of shading is all we need. I'll get the bottom. These 2 legs that are the back legs of the bed, those will be completely in shadow. So I'm grabbing more of my dark color and painting those in all the way. All right, as far as the rest of the footboard goes, we're going to do a line of shadow right underneath the scalloped edge. So I'm just going to follow that scalloped edge and just do a line of the brown. Just right along. And then I'm also going to do the outer edges of this section. So the 2 sides, we'll do a line of shadow right across the bottom as well. All right, the last bit of shading for this section on the bed is the headboard. And we're going to add the shading along both sides and the middle between the pillows. And then we're going to do just a little line of shadow right along the top edge of the pillows. Just like that. So our bed is starting to come together. Looks really, really great. All right, next we're going to go to the bunny. And this bunny is so super cute. I love him so much. I'm going to clean off my brush and kind of dry off my brush a little bit and then dip it into some water. And we're actually going to add shading for him using the color Vintage Photo. I love Vintage Photo on top of Scattered Straw. It's a really great combination. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that Vintage Photo. And we're going to do similar shading so that the shading is all on the outer edges if the light was coming directly onto the center of the bunny. So we're going to take the shadow and we're going to go right along the side of him right there. And we can do that for both sides. Go all the way down. For his arms, we're going to have that color kind of swoop in just a little bit and shade the bottom section of his arms. And then for the bottom, this will actually be in the bed so you won't see it, but we're going to add that brown shade all to the bottom. And his foot down here can go right there. All right, for the ears, we're going to do very similar and have the shadow just right along the bottom edge. And then those little bottom part of the ears, those would be completely in shadow. So we're just going to color all of those in. All right, at this point, the bunny is dry enough that we could add a pink nose too. So I'm cleaning off my brush and I'm going to grab a little bit of that worn lipstick and just put that right there on his little nose. Such a little cute little bunny. All right, so now let's go in and do some more shading. Oh, got a little water droplet right there. Not a huge deal. If that happens, it will pull up some of your distress paint. So go ahead and just paint that back in as much as you want. Just fill in that area. I'm going to try to fix this. This is what happens when we're painting. Sometimes we have an oops. No big deal. I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. Hopefully it'll dry okay. All right. We're going to come up here and paint the vase. So I'm going to dip back into my Seedless Preserves. And I'm just going to add the shading along that side. Just like that. Doesn't need a whole lot. We're going to do the same shading for the flower vase using that broken china. We'll just add that a little bit right there. That'll add just enough color to give it some variation. We're going to the peeled paint, and for this box of tissues, this entire side will be in shadow, so we're going to paint that entire side. And then just a little bit on the front. And you can grab more paint if you need to. I'm also going to add the darker paint on the top too. All right, we're getting close here. All right, let's take a moment and we're going to paint the top of the bed. I'm going to go right into worn lipstick. It's the same color I used for the bunny's cheeks and nose. And I'm just going to do a wash of color over the entire blanket. And I'm also going to use that same pink for the heart down below on the bed itself. We're going to let that dry and we'll come back to it in a bit to add some more shading and detail. While we've got that pink, we're going to color in our flowers. Just a quick wash of pink right over the top. That's all we need. And I'm also going to paint one of these books up here at the top. It's going to give a pink spine to this one right here. All right, so those pink areas, we've got the blanket on the bed, the heart, the flowers, and then one of the books. Okay, I forgot one little spot of green. You guys might have spotted it already. We need to add a little bit of shading on the leaves on the flower. So I'm going to grab a little more of that darker green. and just bring that in right along the bottom on the leaves, just so it has a little bit of a more intense green. Okay, I'm going to take our broken china color and I'm going to paint the spine of this book right here. There we go. Now you can leave the books as is if you want, but I like to have a little bit of detail on mine. So I'm going to grab some more of that broken china and use the very, very tip of my brush, and I'm going to do some really thin lines just to add detail onto these books. Now this is something you do not have to do. I'm just a little crazy and wanted to add that in. Got a little water right there too. Okay, so I think the last thing, I think most everything's all painted. We just need to add the detail to these pink areas down on the bed. All right, you might need your heat tool at this point. I'm just going to zap mine just a little bit to help it dry. I have a glass surface here, so I can dry this directly on my surface, but I'm actually going to lift it up because I want you guys to do this with yours as well. Lift it up away from the surface of what you're working on because you don't want the heat directly on the surface. Okay, so I'm going to grab a fresh smushing of my Born lipstick because I want this to be fairly dark. We're going to be adding a crisscross pattern on the front or on this blanket here. So I'm going to get my brush just a little bit wet. I'm going to add some to my brush here, and I'm going to go do vertical lines on the bed itself, so on the blanket. So I'll just go like this, adding those vertical lines. And then as I add the horizontal, I'm going to do one that's straight across the bottom, just like that. And then if you notice here, there's a little dip right there in the middle. So I'm going to sort of follow that dip and have it kind of bend down in the middle there. You see that? While I've got that darker pink on my brush, I'm going to come down here and add a little bit of shading just onto the side and bottom of the heart on the bed. Okay, we are all done with the painting on this sheet. We've only got a couple more things to paint here. Hopefully we'll get through this fairly quickly. We're going to set this one aside to dry. And the next one we're going to work on is the skinny piece with the bunny, the first aid kit, and the heart. Now this bunny is exactly like our first bunny. So let's go ahead and get the scattered straw on our brush. And we're just going to paint him completely the same as the other bunny. We're going to do a complete wash of our yellow shade. And make sure you have a little bit of pink ready to go for the blush on his cheeks as well. All right, I've got him painted in, so I'm going to grab a little bit of that worn lipstick, and I'll just do some little dabs of the worn lipstick and let that color sort of fade out. Now if you notice, one of mine isn't spreading as much as the other, so I've dabbed off my brush and I'm just going to sort of touch the edge around the pink, and it sort of gets everything wet again and it'll encourage it to move around and spread. All right, for the little first aid kit, I'm going to take a little bit of that blue. You can use a little bit of the broken china or the tumbled glass. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading right across the bottom and the one side, and also on the little handle. That's all the blue that we're adding to that. And then I'm going to introduce a new red. We're going to use Candied Apple. It's a nice bright red. And we're going to paint, add a little bit of that Candied Apple. We're going to paint our heart. We're going to just do, like I did before, just a plain wash of color. We're going to put that around the Band-Aid. Just like that. I'm going to clean off my brush, get rid of any of that red. I'm going to hit this with my heat tool to speed everything up so that we can do another layer of paint. So I'll just put this right here. All right. And now we're going to come in and do our second layer. So we're going to go into that vintage photo, other brown for the bunny's shadowing. And for these ears, we're going to do, again, the outer edge. The outside edge of each ear. And then coming down each side. Along the bottom, including the feet, and then down this other side as well. We're also going to do a shadow right at the bottom of his arms and also a little bit below his arms. Okay, so that's all of the shading we're doing on the bunny itself. I'm going to go ahead and paint its cute little nose with my pink color. Just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and paint the first aid kit. I'm just going to add red to that cross that's on it. Using that Candied Apple red right there. And then for the Band-Aid, you can choose whatever color you want. In fact, I realized on my finished card that's like photographed and in your instruction book that I never painted the Band-Aid. So you can paint it whatever color you want. I'm going to use a little bit of that vintage photo. Just make sure it's kind of paled out a little bit. And I'm just going to add just some shadowing right along the bottom, right there. And then to add a little bit of shadow to the heart, I'll pick up that same Candied Apple. And I'm just going to add a little bit of color right along the side and the bottom. It doesn't show up too much because that red's pretty intense. All right, let me zoom out and you can see all this. And I'm going to put both of these that I painted so far on screen. So if you are still painting, you can reference them while we just talk and chat for a little bit. We do have one more watercolor panel to paint. Well, two more actually. One's the background for a card and the other is kind of like a central colored area for our card. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. I just wanted to stop the painting for a moment in case any of you are catching up so that you have a chance to really look on screen and see where I've placed the shadows if any of you were wondering. Just realizing I probably could have put some shadow right underneath this bunny's arms. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm just going to grab a little bit of that vintage photo. I'm just going to add a little bit of shading right underneath his arms. There we go. Just add that in. Okay, so if any of you are done and you're ready to move on, I'm going to keep these on screen for a minute here while I get my other watercolor panel pieces. You should have the panel that has some stamping on it around the outer edge. It's this one right here. Go ahead and get that one out. And we're going to be taping it to a hardboard or a clipboard or something that you can pick up and move around. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Hopefully you have, watched all of this enough that you know what you're doing. If you need to go ahead and pause this video, pause, come back. We're all good. But we're going to move on. All right, and I'm going to zoom out here because we need to see the larger area now. Okay, I'm going to set these aside. And I'm going to bring in my hardboard and I'm going to tape it down to my work surface here. So I've still got like the pencil marks from when I did my prep. So I will erase those in just a minute. I'm going to tape this to a board and I'm taping it, and I want to make sure I don't tape too far into the actual painting itself. So about anywhere between 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little more than 1/4 of an inch, that's how far your tape can overlap. And if you don't have tape or a board to work with, you can do this. It'll just be a little bit more challenging because your paper will want to curl up and warp. So it's always a great idea if you're going to be painting, you know, completely from side to side on your project. It's a great idea to tape it down. Now we got away with not taping down our previous sheets, these two, because we weren't adding too much paint. We weren't adding too much moisture, and it wasn't all the way to the edge. That's kind of my rule for watercolor painting. If I'm going to be painting all the way to the edge, I'm going to tape it down. All right, so now I've got this taped down. I'm going to run my fingertips over those edges to make sure it's really adhered. And I'm also going to clean up my palette over here. So I'm going to take my paper towel, and this is how I clean it up most of the time. I do an initial wiping clean with my paper towel, gets most of the ink, and then I'm going to grab another clean paper towel, and I'm just going to dip it into my water, add a little more moisture to my board here, and then wipe that down until it's completely dry. And this is just because we're going to be using a lot of one particular color. So I'm going to really smush it down there a lot. Okay, we're going to be using seedless preserves. And like I said, we're using a lot of this. So go ahead and really smush that down. If you've got the bigger ink pad, it'll be a little easier. There we go. And we're going to be doing a fairly solid wash of color. Here's that finished card. This is what we're doing. Notice that there's a little bit of a variation in color as it goes along. So it's not a big deal if you have a lot of kind of like splotchy areas, because it's going to look really great on our final card. So we're going to go ahead and start painting. And this is when having a board comes in handy, because I'm going to be picking this up and kind of manipulating and moving it around. All right, I'm going to dip my brush in my water. I'm going to come over here and get a nice puddle of color going. Nice puddle of color. And then I'm just going to start doing sweeping motions going all the way across. And if your brush is a little bit smaller like mine, you might have trouble having like getting enough paint to really go all the way across. All right, so I've still got my pencil marks. I totally forgot to erase them. Not a huge deal. It's actually going to give me a little bit of indication on how far I need to be painting in. I just want to make sure that I paint past the images that are on the side here. So I'm going to continue painting down. Just coming all the way down. And then I'm going to come back to the other side and continue painting down this side. You notice I'm getting a little bit of a variation in color, which I think looks awesome. All right, along the bottom here, we're mostly just wanting a flat color. Not so flat, because we are getting some darker spots and lighter spots, but we just want the entire area filled with color. All the way to the very bottom. All right, if you've got any spots you missed, go ahead and fill those in. And I'm going to use my heat tool to speed up the drying process. So go ahead, get that heat tool out. We're going to dry this, and then we're going to go in and add some really simple shading on all of these images. And you'll know when everything's dry when you see the surface of the paper sort of suck back down to the hardboard. Okay, mine feels dry. In fact, another way you can test to make sure it's dry is you can kind of feel with your hand. And if you feel any cool spots, any cold spots, especially after you've heated it some, that means it's not dry. So go ahead and heat it up some more. And like I was saying, you'll notice that as you paint that the paper almost kind of bubbles up over the top in between the tape margins. And when it dries, it sort of goes and like suctions back down to the hardboard. That's another indication that your paper is completely dry. It goes back to its original form, which should be flat. All right, so like I said, we're going to add some really simple shading around those images to see how there's just some darker shading. I'm mostly just shading the left side of each item. And then on the first aid kits, I'm putting in the little cross as well. I'm just adding really simple shading. So for these, because we want it to be darker, I'm going to sort of dry off my brush a little bit. And I'm going to go straight into that ink with a little tiny bit of water on it. And I'm just going to start adding some shadow. So I'll add this right here. Along the soup cup, I just go right along the bottom and then the interior of the soup. For the crutches, or crutch I should say, I mostly just do the top and then down one side and then the bottom. And I'll also go across that sidebar too, or the crossbar. For the tissues, I do the full left side. And then just like we shaded it on that original painting, I just go right across the side and then the top. So I'll continue painting these little areas. For the heart, I usually go around the sides and then the Band-Aid itself. For the bouquet of flowers, I'm just adding a little bit of shading right down this one side. Now you can have really messy shading on these because it's not the focal point of the card itself. It's just the kind of the outer frame. So it's not as noticeable. You can be a little messy with this. I'm painting fairly quickly because I know it doesn't have to be completely perfect. All right, coming down and I'm continuing painting. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it's raining here right now. So I've got some rain sounds in my craft room. It's a unique sound for me. I don't know if you guys know this, but I live in Utah, which is technically a desert. So we don't get rain very often, so this is kind of fun. Take your time as you paint all these little images going around, but also you don't need to be too fussy about it. You know, do whatever you need to do. I'm going to pick up my board here because I don't want to rest my hand directly on what I've already painted. So I'm going to pick it up and rotate it a little bit so that I can paint these other areas without having my hand rest directly into what I've already painted. This is a really fun way to paint like a background with a lot of little images, especially because we're using all the same color. So it really simplifies it and you can just have fun while you paint. A little bit of shading on the side of this prescription bottle. Almost done here. Oh, we've got thunder. You guys hear the thunder? All right, I've got my first aid kit up here. I just need to add a little bit of shading on that one. All right, so I've got this completely painted. If you're not done yet, no worries, just keep painting. I'm going to clean up my surface here while it's drying. I'm going to do what I did before and use a paper towel to do the initial cleanup. And then I'll get a wet paper towel to clean up some more. Wet that paper towel, clean up some more. Okay, so then the last watercolor that we're going to be doing a colorful background to go behind the bunny in card number 2. So I'm using only 3 colors for this. I'm going to be using Picked Raspberry, Mustard Seed, and Mermaid Lagoon. So for this background as well, you're going to be taping it to a board. So I'm going to speed along the drying process for this one, and then we'll remove it from the board so that we can tape the other one to this board, because we're going to reuse the board. We only have one board. This is mostly dry, but I'm going to go ahead and hit my heat tool just to speed up the drying process. Okay. When you're removing backgrounds or projects from your board, you're going to start to peel up, and you're going to peel directly, like pulled back. Like you don't want to like pull it from the top. You want to like get it really flat to your surface. And that's what will prevent tearing your watercolor paper. So get it really, really flat as you remove the tape, and you should be all good. Okay, so I'm going to set this one aside, and I'm going to put my full plain background. We labeled it for card 2 when we were prepping. I'm going to put that directly down onto my hardboard, and we're going to tape it down as close to the edge as possible. Now when we paint, we're going to try to not let the paint get all the way to the edge. So, but if it does, it's not a huge deal. We're taping this one down because we're going to be adding quite a bit of paint and water to our background, just like I mentioned before. All right, and while we're taping that down, or while you're catching up to where I'm at, I'm going to talk you through what we're going to do first, and then we'll start doing it. So we're going to be painting with 3 colors to create our background. And I'll show you on screen what this is the background, what it looks like. We're going to be painting with 3 colors. And as the colors overlap, it will create new colors. So we're going to do it almost in color wheel fashion, where there's a pink up here, there's a yellow right here, and a blue at the bottom. And where each of those colors overlap, we're going to get a new color. So that's what we're aiming for today. We're going to be doing it in 2 layers of paint. The first layer, we're going to be painting wet on wet, meaning that the paper is wet and we're bringing in wet watercolor or wet ink. We're going to dry it with our heat tool, and then the second layer, we're going to be adding color right on top in a wet on dry technique, meaning we're bringing wet paint in and putting it onto dry paper. All right, so hopefully you've caught up to me. And we're going to be using 3 colors, like I mentioned before. We're picked raspberry, mustard seed, and mermaid lagoon. So on your palette, go ahead and put a generous amount of each color. Just smush those in. And I picked these colors in particular because I think, in my opinion, they're the closest to the colors when, like when you print something from your home printer and you've got cyan, magenta, and yellow. This is your cyan, magenta, and yellow. That's where I got those colors from. So that's going to give us a really great rainbow palette. Go ahead and grab a paper towel if you need one. And we're going to clean off our brush really, really well. See, I've still got Steeless Preserves on mine, so I really need to clean my brush because we're going to wet the entire surface of our watercolor paper here. So we want to make sure that our brush is really, really clean. And you could do this with a brush, or you could do it with a distress sprayer or a spray bottle. In fact, I would probably recommend using a spray bottle over what I'm going to show you today because a spray bottle is a little easier. But we're going to do it this way. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, well, first I'm going to sop up this water that's on my work surface here. And then I'm going to get my brush wet, and I'm just going to start adding water along the surface here. And I'm adding a lot of water. Quite a bit of water. And I've got my board tipped as well. All right, and I'm just going over that, making sure all the areas. You probably can't see that much because of my bright lights, but like right there, you can see how wet my paper is, just like that. Okay, now as we start adding color to our wet paper, remember, paint goes wherever there's water. Wherever there's wet paper, it's going to travel. So we want to keep our colors fairly concentrated because they're going to wick out on their own. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and pick up that picked raspberry. And I'm just going to start painting. Notice how the paint starts spreading. I'm going to clean off my brush and then immediately go into mustard seed. And I'm going to start putting that directly on top or on the side here. And I want them to overlap just a little bit too to get a little bit of that orange. And then I'm going to pick up the Mermaid Lagoon. And we're going to add that blue down here at the bottom. Overlap and get that purple. And overlap and get a little of that green. Okay, so now we have just our initial painting. Now you can let this air dry. We're not today because we're in a hurry. We're teaching a class, right? we're in the middle of this class. But when you're at home, you could let it, on your own, you could just let it dry. And as it dries, it's going to keep mixing on the paper and keep moving around. Now, if you like what you see and you want to stop it from moving, you can do that with your heat tool. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my heat tool and I'm going to dry this. And I'm going to watch for when the paper goes back to the hardboard again. right, we have a lot of water on this, so if it's not quite dry, go ahead and keep drying with your heat tool. I'm going to go in with a second layer, and this is where we get those really fun, like harsher edges, and having this kind of like real watercolor look. And you're going to get that by not touching every single area. Notice there's a gap right here and there's a gap right here. You're going to kind of, I like to think of it as like doing like swirling, almost cloud shapes of adding color in. And that's what's going to give us some really interesting mix of color. Put a little water on my brush, get some of that picked raspberry, and I'm going to go directly over the top. And I'm just going to start adding like little swishes and swirls of color. Just like that. I'm going to grab mustard seed and do the same. And then I'm going to pick up the Mermaid Lagoon. And notice I'm already getting some of those harsh lines, which is really fun. I'll just bring that blue down here at the bottom. Okay. So this is where you get that really classic watercolor look. Now mine's really circular right now, and if you notice on the finished card, it's a little bit taller than it is wide. So I'm going to take a moment here to extend this out just a little bit. I'm going to bring that pink out up at the top, bring the blue at the bottom, just because I want to make sure I have enough room for both the bunny and the greeting. So if yours is looking a little bit too circular, like mine was, go ahead and add that color on. This particular watercolor look is really forgiving for that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit this with my heat tool again, just to speed up the drying process. All right, so here we are. I'm going to go ahead and clean up my palette here while the rest of you are painting and kind of catching up a little bit. We are done with all of the painting for today. So, well, just kidding. We have one more thing. Oh gosh, you guys, there's so much painting, I forgot. But this last one is so easy. You're going to love it. Okay, so we need to do one more little watercolor piece, and it's going to be for our greeting on card 3. All right, so in your prepped pieces, let me see if I can grab it. You should have a really small piece right here, and it just says card 3. We're going to be using 2 colors. We're basically making the watercolor paper that does this greeting right here. So if you can picture, that's die cut out of that. So we want to have the Sealish Preserves kind of at the top, and then it's going to fade into Chipped Sapphire. So I'm going to grab those 2 colors. Got Sealish Preserve and then Chipped Sapphire. This is one of my favorite combinations. I keep telling you guys, we're almost done, and then here's more. It's like an aerobics instructor, right? All right, so like we did on that other one, we're just going to get a lot of color and just start painting right across this whole area. And you want it pretty close to the edge. We're going to be die cutting pretty close. When you get about halfway, go ahead and switch colors. And you can sort of help to mix those colors together by overlapping them as you paint. So I'm going to come up here and do a little bit into that Sealish Preserves. And then I'm going to grab the Sealish Preserves and bring that down into the Chipped Sapphire. And that's just going to help me get a little bit of a blend as it goes down. And then I'll just do one last little painting from top to bottom. Okay, so here, I'm going to clean my brush off real quick. Here's our last little panel. I'm going to hit this with my heat tool to speed up the drying process. It's a small piece, so be really careful with your fingertips. You're going to have to dry half and then pick it up and move it around. I'm picking it up, moving it around. All right, so mine's completely dry. Now we really are done with the watercolor, I promise. All right, go ahead and clean up your area. We're going to get to assembling our cards, and we've got just a little bit of stamping and ink blending when it comes to that. We're just over an hour into class, so we've got about a half hour left of instruction, and then I will be joining you over at Facebook for some live chat while you finish up your cards. So if you need a little extra time putting this all together, feel free. I'm just going to clean up a little bit before we get to assembling our cards. Just cleaning everything up. Now, when I got into watercoloring on cards, like I had done some watercoloring in college. For those who aren't familiar with me or have never heard my background, I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts with an emphasis in graphic design. I'm going to go ahead and remove this from my board since it's dry too while we're chatting. So I had to take a watercolor class for my major, and I only took one. I waited until my senior year. I wish I wouldn't have waited for so long because I loved it so much. But you know, when I found my real love for watercolor, it was when I started doing it with card making. It was about 6 or 7 years after I graduated, and I had gotten into card making, and then I got into watercoloring. And then I realized that watercoloring for a smaller little palette like this versus a really large painting was a whole lot less intimidating. So I really did love that. All right, we're going to set a lot of our little pieces aside, and we're going to do die cutting. We've got to die cut these two pieces here. So also, while we're doing some die cutting, if you haven't already, go ahead and make your card bases. You'll just need 3 card bases. All right, so we're going to break out those dies, and we're going to do some die cutting. So we're going to do all of our die cutting right now, and then we can just start stamping and assembling. All right. My watercolor panel is just a little bit too big for my... I'm using a mini die cutting machine today, so I'm just going to... There we go. That's perfect. So if you need to cut yours down, you're more than welcome. I have a magnetic mat with my die cutting machine. I'm using the Anna Griffin Empress Mini. So these are all going to hold in place while we do our die cutting. And this is kind of fun because we're going to be die cutting almost every single image. We will have to do, I'm going to run this through twice because we have 2 nightstands and 2 tissues. But for the most part, we can do all of this in one go. Just get those lined up the best you can. If you don't have a magnetic mat like mine, you can use a little bit of tape to hold your dies down, keep them in place. All right, and we have our little sitting bunny down here. The fun thing there's lots of fun things about these dies and stamps, but I love that the dies will cut out the little arms on the bunnies, and it will also cut out the little line on the bed so you can put your bunny inside of it. I think it's just so super cute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run this through my die cutting machine. I've got my little die cutting machine right here. All right. I also have a little dish here so I can save all my little pieces so nothing gets lost. And you'll notice that watercolor paper die cuts beautifully because it's so soft. All right, we're going to use the nightstand and the little tissue die once again. Now, if any of you are familiar with this magnetic mat for the Anna Griffin machine, technically you're not supposed to be cutting into it, but I do all the time because I just find it convenient. And I heard that Anna Griffin herself does that. So I thought, okay, that's permission enough for me. So I started just die cutting directly into the mat because why not, right? All right, I'm going to run this through. All right, nightstand number 2 and tissues number 2. And then we're gonna cut out our standing bunny and the heart and the little first aid kit. So I'll grab my standing bunny and first aid kit and the heart. Okay, run this through my die cutting machine. I have a funny thing. This little, it's so cute. Look how it's mini. It's just so cute. It's a little tiny machine. I just got it this week. I ordered it a few weeks ago. I got it on sale. They had a big super sale, and it was actually a used machine, maybe refurbished or returned. I'm not sure what the deal was. It's perfectly fine. It's been working great. But it came with it. When I ordered it, it said, does not come with plates. I'm like, no problem. I'm getting such a good deal on this machine. I can order my own plates. So I ordered my own plates. And then when the machine came, it did have plates, but someone else had used it. Had someone else's cutting on it. So that was their cutting. I thought that was just funny. All right, I've got one more bit of die cutting to do. And we're going to put the seedless preserves at the top and then Feel Better Soon. We're going to cut right directly into that. It could be the other way around too if you want your seedless preserves at the bottom. I'll run that through. All right. Well, it looks like mine didn't cut all the way through, so I'm going to leave it in the same spot it's at, and I'm going to run it through once again. That looks a little better. Okay. And sometimes it'll want to stick in there, so you might have to grab a little pokey tool. I'll get all of this out of the way first, since we're done with our die cutting for now. This is just a Tim Holtz craft pick, and it just helps release everything from the die. Okay. And while we've got this die cut out right here, we're going to go ahead and stack them so that we have a more substantial greeting. So in your prep, you should have cut out 2 additional ones. So I'm just doing 2, make it a 3-layer because the watercolor paper is a little bit thicker. I'm going to zoom in here and I'm going to show you a trick for when you're stacking your die cuts. I learned this tip from Corinne Wiskman. She's fantastic. I love her. So what you're going to do is you're going to be applying the adhesive onto the top of both of these, and then we're going to adhere them all together at the same time. So I'm just going to use my tweezers to kind of hold this down, and I'm going to start adding little dabs of glue, making sure I get glue on all the little edges that are kind of by themselves, like the bottom of these T's. Okay. Come over here and put adhesive on this one as well. Just adding a little bit of glue. Okay. Then I can take my watercolor piece and I can put that right on top, and then stack that right on top, and then pick them all up together. And because the glue is all still wet, I can use my fingertips to manipulate them and get them lined up perfectly. Lovely. And if you've got any glue squidging out, not a big deal. All right, so now I have that nice, thick, substantial greeting. And I can set that aside to dry while we start assembling our cards. All right, so now that we've got all of our pieces ready, let's go ahead and go into the actual cards themselves. So we're going to start with card number 1. You're going to need your card base right here. And you're also going to need 2 colors to do some ink blending. I've got worn lipstick and tumbled glass. Here's our finished card, just so you kind of see where we're headed. I'm going to use the clear backing on the stamp set to do a little bit of masking. It's going to be so fun. Okay. So you notice it's a little lower than halfway over here. So what we're going to do is take our little plastic sheet and we're going to put it right along. I'm going to take a little bit of tape. We're going to get this as level as we can. And then I'm going to turn it over and I'm just going to tape it to the back here. So that's going to kind of hold it in place. And I'm also going to grab a little bit of tape for the sides, just to be safe. All right. And then you're going to grab your blending brush. And we're going to be using tumbled glass and worn lipstick and just add the color so it creates this background. I'm going to start with tumbled glass. And I'm going to kind of just blend right off that edge there. We just want to have a nice kind of almost horizon line. You can have the color concentrating. This isn't completely straight, but that's okay. All right, so then when you're done with that, I'm just going to turn mine around because this is the side that has ink on it right here. Turn that around and I'm going to line it up so that we can blend the pink. Well, that's really crooked. That's hilarious. That's okay. That is very crooked. We're going to redo that. All right, so prepare additional card bases in case you need them is basically what we're saying, right? Okay, I'm going to try this once again. I'm going to use my grid mat to help me get this lined up just right. And this is almost as if you truly are right here in my craft room because we're doing this in real time. In fact, you know what we're going to do? Let's see. I'm going to tape the card base to my mat here. That'll hold that in place, and then I can come in and I can tape my clear plastic sheet right on top so that I know it's completely straight. Perfect. Okay. Take two. Going in with temple glass. Just blending right from that edge. Okay. And then I'm going to peel this up. I'm going to turn it around and bring it to the bottom. And tape that down right there. Actually, I'm going to turn it like this. See how there's that ink right there? I want to use the clean edge. Okay, get that lined up just right. And then we're going to go into the worn lipstick. Now the worn lipstick, if you notice on the finished card, it comes up quite a bit. We want a lot of pink right behind the bed. So I'm going to use my blender brush. We'll just start blending right from that center. And try to get a lot of color coming right from that area. And then kind of fading out as it goes towards the edges of the card. Okay, looking pretty good. I think I just want a little more color on the sides. Okay. And peel this up. All right, so now we're going to start assembling our card and putting our greeting on it as well. So you're going to get out your MISTI or stamp positioning tool, whatever you've got, and we're going to start stamping. So our greeting is going to go in the center in the blue area. So I'm putting my card base in right there. I notice on the finished card, it's just about centered between that horizon line and the bottom of the card, and then it's just centered horizontally as well. So hope you feel better soon. I'm just going to put that right there centered. And I'm going to be stamping in a black ink. I'm using the same black ink I used for all of my stamping, for all the critters and the images. So I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black. Just stamp that down really well. And clean off my stamp. Okay, so now we can start assembling this card. I'm gonna put my Misty aside for a little bit. We will come back to that for our other cards. Here's our finished card. We're gonna start assembling it just the way that is. The first thing we need to do is glue the bunny, the bed, and the Kleenex all together. So I'm gonna dump out all my pieces. We're going to start putting things together. So the bunny's going to go right into the little bed, and our box of Kleenexes or tissues is going to go in his hands. So let's go ahead and glue that together first. So if you notice, it's overlapping onto the bed. So I'm going to put a little dab of glue, and I'm going to have it be right behind the top of the box. And then slide that in. And the box of Kleenexes is kind of tipped just a little bit like that. Let's zoom in so you can see this a little better. All right, so then we're going to put just a little line of glue right along the bottom of the bunny. And then we're going to slide him in and get that Kleenex box in front. And then he's also sort of tipped off to the side just a little bit. So I'm going to tip him right there. All right, so there's our bunny. He's going to go directly in the center of the card. I'm going to grab some foam adhesive, and we're going to be putting foam adhesive on the back of all of these images. So I'm just going to go ahead and start putting foam tape on the back of all of them. And this is something that if you don't want to assemble it right this moment, you don't have to. Everything that's left is just putting things together on the card. For some of these smaller pieces, I'm going to have to cut my foam tape down into smaller pieces. All right, just a couple more pieces to put foam on the back. I've got my two little Kleenexes. And let's see, did I get both nightstands? I did, okay. Okay, so we're gonna build our scene from the center out. So I'm first going to adhere the bunny in bed. We'll just put that right in the center, just like that. Press that down. And then we're going to do the two nightstands. And the nightstand, like the bottom of the nightstand is lined up with the bottom of the bed. We're going to put the lamp on the nightstand on the left, and I like to just have it come down a little bit down onto the nightstand. And then the flowers are going to go over on the other nightstand with the tissues. So they're going like kind of right onto the side. And then I'll have some tissues. It can just be lined up right there. And then we're going to have one little ball of tissues off to the side on the ground. If you're anything like me, that is how my bedroom looks when I'm sick. So there is card number 1. These other 2 cards are going to come together really, really, really quickly. We're going to go to card number 2 right here, and we're first going to build our little bunny that has the first aid kit. So we're going to pop these little arms up, and we'll put glue on the back. And there's the finished card. And notice that the first aid kit is just a little bit off to the side. I just noticed I put shadow on their glasses, and I didn't with you guys this time, but just know you could do that. All right, I'm going to slide the first aid kit in. It's a little bit diagonal. Perfect. I'm going to put some foam adhesive on the back of him right now. But we're not going to adhere him quite yet. We just want him ready to go so that we can do our stamping right there. All right, so let's get out our Misty once again. I'll zoom out for you. And we're going to just place him on the inside on the card. This doesn't even adhere to the card front yet, but it will be. We're going to be placing him right on top. And this is going to help us get our greeting centered. So this one says, wishing you a speedy recovery. I'm going to put that directly over the top. Get that lined up just right. Then I can remove the bunny, and I'm going to close the door of my Misty and pick that up. Now, if you want to use an anti-static powder tool, you definitely can, but I find that watercolor paper tends to be pretty dry, and it doesn't really have a problem with embossing powder as much as other types of cardstock, so you don't necessarily have to use it. I'm going to be using Versamark ink, but you did get an embossing ink pad in your box. Thank you, Ranger. And I'm going to just stamp this down, give it a nice press. And then we're going to put some white embossing powder on top. And I believe you also got some white embossing powder in your box. So I'll just put this embossing powder right on top, shake off the excess, and then we're going to have our greeting right there. All right. Grabbing my heat tool, and when you emboss, you just want to watch until the powder melts. You don't want it to heat any longer than that, especially on watercolor paper, because watercolor paper is very, very porous. And if you overheat your embossing powder, it will melt back into the paper. So tip your project in the light so you can see it really well. Look up close if you need to. And as soon as it has melted the powder, move on. Don't let that heat tool linger. So here we go. And I like to kind of heat the whole thing, and then I'll go back in and get specific areas. It was that fast. Now we've been using our heat tool to speed our watercolor drying along, so your heat tool will be very well heated before you go into this. Okay, so we're going to adhere this directly onto our card front. It should be the exact size of your card. I'm going to use a tape runner adhesive for this. I'm just using some Tombow Extreme adhesive. But you want to get that adhesive along all the edges. Really? I need a refill? I need a refill. You guys? All right, well, we're pausing. As I said, this is real time. we go with what we're doing here. So I'm going to grab a refill. Thankfully, I have one. And then we'll get moving here. So if any of you are catching up, this is prime opportunity to catch up while I put my adhesive back together. All right. But I guess this will show how easy the refill works. All right. Get that started. And we're back in business. Okay. Adhere that directly to the front of the card. I always start from the fold. And then just press that down. All right, we've got our little bunny that's ready to go. Take that foam adhesive off and adhere him right there. All right, so there is card number 2, all finished. All right, let's go on to the very last card. This one should come together very, very quickly as well. The first thing we're going to do is cut down our card base. So this is a little bit too large for the card itself right now, but we did that so that we could paint edge to edge. So you're going to cut it down to where it's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. I would recommend taking off 1/4 inch off of each edge, and that'll get it just about centered for you. So I'm going to grab my paper trimmer and we'll do just that. All right, here's my paper trimmer. And I'm just going to start taking off 1/4 inch off of each edge. So I kind of like take a measure of kind of like where it's at. Okay, I'm going to grab my 3rd card base, and like I did with card number 2, I'm just going to adhere this directly to my card front. So I'm putting that Tombow Extreme Adhesive edge to edge, and then adhere that down starting from the fold. Should be pretty perfect. All right, you should have one piece of watercolor paper that's completely blank. It should be labeled for card 3. We're going to put some foam adhesive on the back of this. And I am very generous with my foam adhesive because I don't want any saggy middles. And we'll just be adhering this directly to the center of the card. So right there in the center, if you have a little bit of pencil line still showing like I do, that'll help guide you to get it on straight. All right, so we're going to be putting the Feel Better right there, and then, or Feel Better Soon, I should say, and then this little heart down here at the bottom. So we're going to put some foam on the back of the little heart. So just cut down a little bit of foam or whatever your adhesive of choice is. I'll just put that right there in the center. And then I'm going to put some glue on the back of the greeting using that same glue. And here's a tip for when you're using tweezers. My tweezers totally walked off. I don't know where they went. Here they are. So before you put glue on, go ahead and put your tweezers on where it would be most comfortable for where you are going to be holding it when you adhere, and then flip that over. And you'll just add the little dots of glue or little lines. I'm just adding a little bit of glue to each area. Okay. And then you can adhere that directly down onto the card itself. I'm going to hold that in place for just a little bit, and I'm going to grab a black marker or a black pen, and I'm going to be adding some dash lines just around the outer edge. I thought it looked really nice. It kind of finished off the card. So just going to do some dash lines right along that outer edge. Hopefully the pacing of this class has been enough that you can kind of follow along. And if not, like I said, the instructions are in that book that you received with your box. So you can go back to that. And I think the most valuable part of that is the photographs. So feel free to look at those and kind of build the card from there. But here we go. Here are all of the cards. Let's zoom out just a little bit so we can see everything all at once. So there's card 1, 2, and 3 for today. That came together really, really quickly. I hope you guys enjoyed all of the painting and getting to try out a few different techniques. Watercoloring can be simple, it can be easy. It was a little time consuming today because we were doing 3 cards, but how often do you sit down in one card session and make 3 cards all at once, right? So don't be intimidated by watercoloring. There are so many fun watercolor techniques that you can do, especially with reactive inks like distress inks. They're fantastic. I've got a lot of different cards on my YouTube channel and my blog that all show you how you can use those inks in different ways. So if you're interested in seeing more of that, head on over to my YouTube channel. You can just look up Kristina Werner or K Werner Design at YouTube and it'll pop right up. And you can even do K Werner Design Distress Watercolor and you'll get some specific watercoloring videos or things you can do with your distress inks when it comes to adding water. So thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be over in the Facebook group for the event and we're going to chat for a little bit. I hope you'll join me over there. You can finish up your projects or whatever you'd like. Thanks so much and I'll see you over there.